What is history? How should history be written? E.H. Carr, the historian, diplomat, journalist, philosopher, and author of a 14-volume history on the Soviet Union, set out to answer this question in 1961. The book is considered a classic. Carr starts by discussing the common sense view of history. In essence, that history is about facts and simply collecting as many facts as possible. In this view, facts are like fish on a fishmonger's slab, ready to be chosen and cooked. There are basic facts, raw materials, but the facts only speak when the historian calls on them. Carr compares the fact that the Battle of Hastings happened in 1066 with the fact that in 1850 a gingerbread vendor was killed by an angry mob. The latter is not well known, it is unimportant. One is selected over the other because it's considered useful. We use the fact to understand something larger. So on the one side we have the historian in the present making a judgment about what facts to select. On the other side there are documents, letters, diaries, treaties, etc. These are facts of a certain kind, but tell us no more than what the author thought, and are of course invariably one-sided. Carr says that the classical liberal view of history, popular across the 19th century, proposes that, like the hidden hand of the market, letting historians pick from this fishmonger's slab of facts would result in a universal harmony. The truth would emerge. Carr starts to point out a few problems with this view. First, the facts of the past are only accessible through the present. He says of the historian, the very words which he uses, words like democracy, empire, war, revolution, have current connotations from which he cannot divorce them. A historical event looks very different through the eyes of a 17th century Frenchman than it does to a 21st century American. But does this lead to what Carr calls total skepticism? If there are different views at different times, how can any of them be the right one? Is there no objective position from which to view history? To answer the problem of total skepticism, Carr starts with the common view of historical work. That is that 1. The facts are collected, and 2. They are interpreted and written into a narrative. For Carr though, this isn't accurate. It's much more likely that the process is reciprocal. Some facts are collected, a tentative interpretation is made, more facts are collected, the interpretation is revised, and so on. He says the historian is engaged in a continuous process of moulding his facts to his interpretation, and his interpretation to his facts. It is impossible to assign primacy to one over the other. This process is a dialogue between facts in the past and the historian contextualised in the present. He says the past is intelligible to us only in the light of the present, and we can fully understand the present only in the light of the past. He then goes on to say that the process is not just an individual one. The men whose actions the historian studies were not isolated individuals acting in a vacuum. They acted in the context and under the impulse of a past society. He argues then that this means it's obvious we must look at social forces, class, vested interests, as well as individuals. So as well as history being a dialogue between the past and the present, it's now a dialogue between the individual and society. He's painting a picture on multiple axes, past and present, individual and societal. But how then do we retain any sense of objectivity? How do we know where to look and which facts to pick up? To begin to get out of this predicament, Carr moves to compare the process of the historian to the process of the inductive method in science. He says scientists no longer really spend their time searching for the laws of nature, but instead come up with a hypothesis, test whether it's a fact, then reassess. Science is also driven by a back and forth, and by values in the present. He explores a number of objections to history being a science, problematising them in turn. For example, it is said that science deals with the general and history with the particular, with unique events. But he argues that history is also general, For example, the historian looks for the causes of the phenomenon of war or revolutions. These are general categories. Another objection is that history is unable to predict the future, but he points out that although science predicts, it only predicts probabilities. Gravity might predict how an apple falls from a tree, but it can't predict things getting in the way or someone catching it before it hits the ground. He also notes that modern physics after Einstein is also relative, not as universal as was once thought. Ultimately, he says that the word science already covers so many different branches of knowledge, employing so many different methods and techniques, that the onus seems to rest on those who seek to exclude history, rather than on those who seek to include it. Carr's view of history as a science is probably the view that would receive the most criticism today. He moves on to look at causation. For a long time, historians and philosophers looked for universal laws of history to try and make it more scientific. Historians now look for multiple causes. The Bolshevik Revolution, for example, might be said to be caused by the failure of the Tsar, the impoverished proletariat, Lenin's character, etc. Usually a primary cause is given, then maybe a hierarchy of causes. Carr draws an analogy. Driving back from a party, a man who has drank too much in a car with defective brakes kills a man crossing the road to get cigarettes at a blind corner. What was the cause, and what is our motivation in finding out what the cause is? To make roads safer, to reduce drinking? Maybe he was killed because he was desperate for cigarettes, but by intuition we distinguish between rational and accidental causes. Carr's point here, and he quotes the German historian Friedrich Meineck, is that the search for causalities in history is impossible without reference to values. Behind the search for causalities there always lies, directly or indirectly, the search for values. We are always trying to learn something from history. This leads Carr to argue that, to avoid total skepticism, the facts and interpretations historians choose should be organised around the idea of progress. Maybe not as an unbroken straight line without reverses and deviations, as he says, but progress all the same. Ultimately, he says that a belief in progress means belief not in any automatic or inevitable process, but in the progressive development of human potentialities. Being objective, choosing the facts in the hierarchy of causes, means considering the future. He says, when we call a historian objective, we mean, I think, two things. First of all, we mean that he has the capacity to rise above the limited version of his own situation in society and in history. And secondly, he means that he has the capacity to project his vision into the future in such a way as to give him a more profound and more lasting insight into the past than can be attained by those historians whose outlook is entirely bounded by their own immediate situation. In other words, historians should work to transform society as much as other disciplines do. Carr has been criticised for having a relativistic view of history, that the facts and questions are determined by the present so that no objective reading of the past is possible. But through an optimism about the future, Carr also tries to draw a route back to objectivity, picking facts through the value of progress. It's a unique argument, and many have claimed it doesn't hold today, but the text, both short and rich, is still held as a classic introduction to the question, what is history? If you want to support Then and Now, then please subscribe below, and most importantly, click the bell here to receive notifications when I upload a new video. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram in the links in the description below. And if you're feeling really generous, then this channel only exists through the support of pledges on Patreon, where you can support new content with as little as $1 for each new video. Thanks for watching. See you next week.